Everything was absolutely perfect until my sister Lavinia walked in. I want you to really picture the scene because I had spent the better part of 2.5 years planning every single detail of this night, poring over mood boards and saving every extra pound from my paycheck just to make it a reality. The venue was an old, beautifully restored historic estate just outside London. It had these massive floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a botanical garden. And the lighting we chose was this incredible soft glowing amber that made everyone look like they were bathed in candlelight. It felt almost cinematic. It was like a scene pulled straight out of an expensive movie where nothing bad could possibly happen. A safe haven carved out just for Cedric and me. I am 32 years old, working as a financial director, constantly managing stress and other people's expectations. But for the first time in my entire life, I actually felt like I was the main character in my own story. The guests were mingling. The string quartet was playing a beautiful classical rendition of our favorite song, and people were genuinely happy for us. Not just that polite, forced wedding happy where people smile for the cameras and secretly judge the food, but the kind of deep, resonant happiness that comes from your friends and chosen family, knowing you have finally earned something good after a lifetime of putting yourself second. The ceremony itself had gone flawlessly just an hour earlier. My husband Cedric looked breathtaking, standing there at the altar in his dark, tailored suit. He is 34, an architect with his quiet, grounding presence that makes every anxious thought in my head just melt away into nothingness. When he said his vows, his voice didn't shake once. His eyes were shining, locked entirely on mine. And in that moment, the rest of the crowded room completely disappeared. For once in a very long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was safe. I was fiercely loved. And more importantly, I wasn't running around cleaning up somebody else's mess. You see, growing up, I was never allowed to be the center of attention. I was the reliable one, the safety net, the boring, responsible older sister who always had to step back so my younger sister Lavinia could shine. Or more accurately, so she could throw her exhausting tantrums without me getting in the way or making her look bad by comparison. If it was my birthday, I had to share the spotlight because Lavinia felt left out and would start crying until my parents bought her a present too. If I brought home straight A's on my report card, we didn't celebrate too loud because Lavinia was constantly failing maths, and we absolutely could not hurt her fragile self-esteem. I spent my entire childhood and 20s swallowing my own pride, biting my tongue, and making myself small to keep the peace in a house that always revolved around her unpredictable, chaotic moods. But not tonight. Tonight was mine. The silk of my wedding dress felt heavy, luxurious, and expensive against my skin. It was a custom-made gown, pure bridal white, with a delicate hand-stitched lace bodice that took a seamstress months to perfect. I felt beautiful in a way I had never let myself feel before. The champagne was flowing into crystal glasses. The air smelled like expensive white roses and fresh rain, and the entire room was buzzing with joy. Cedric held my hand as we mingled during the cocktail hour, his thumb absent-mindedly drawing little circles on the back of my hand, keeping me anchored. Every single time I looked up at him, I felt this overwhelming, almost painful wave of gratitude. We had paid for everything ourselves down to the very last linen napkin and silver fork. We refused any financial help from my parents, taking no strings-attached money, just Cedric and me building our life together from the ground up. I was so incredibly happy, I actually let myself drop my guard. I let myself believe that for just one night, the universe was going to let me have something purely beautiful without demanding a toll. But the universe has a funny way of letting you get comfortable right before it pulls the rug out from under you. She arrived exactly 1 hour late, incredibly loud, and wrapped completely in white. And when I say white, I want to be absolutely clear. I do not mean off-white. I do not mean champagne or ivory or a pale pastel pink that just catches the light wrong in photographs. No. Lavinia walked through those heavy wooden double doors of the reception hall wearing a bright, pure, blinding wedding white dress. It was floor-length made of a shimmering satin material with a dramatic thigh-high slit up the side and a plunging neckline that demanded attention. It looked exactly like a bridal gown. Actually, if I had been standing next to her in anything even slightly less formal than my own custom dress, people walking in off the street would have automatically assumed she was the one getting married and I was just a bridesmaid. She didn't look embarrassed about being late. She didn't try to sneak in quietly through the back or slip unnoticed into her assigned seat at the family table. Instead, she walked right down the center aisle of the room, her designer heels clicking sharply and loudly against the polished hardwood floor. She held her head high, acting as if the entire day, the flowers, the music, the gathered crowd had been orchestrated solely for her grand entrance. And somehow, without her even having to say a single word at first, she just sucked all the positive, warm energy right out of the room. It was like a vacuum seal popping. Even the soft jazz music that the band had transitioned to felt like it dipped for a second, fading away into this awkward, heavy silence that pressed against my eardrums. People stared. You could literally see the confusion rippling through the crowd like a wave. I watched my closest friends exchange wide-eyed, horrified glances. I saw Cedric's jaw clench so hard a muscle started twitching dangerously near his ear. Someone, a college friend of mine named Sarah, who never had a filter, actually leaned over to me and whispered, "Is this some kind of twisted sick joke?" I didn't have an answer for her. I just stood there frozen, staring at my 4-year-old sister parading around in a white bridal gown at my wedding reception, feeling that deeply familiar, nauseating knot form in the pit of my stomach. It was the exact same heavy stone I had swallowed for years. Every single time she decided my boundaries didn't apply to her, my parents were standing just a few feet away near the bar. My mother, Felicity, looked at Lavinia, then nervously glanced over at me and actively chose to do absolutely nothing. She gave this pathetic, fluttery little wave to Lavinia and immediately turned her back, pretending she was suddenly fascinated by the floral arrangement on the nearest cocktail table. My father, Reginald, just let out a heavy sigh, took a long sip of his whiskey, and stared straight ahead. That was their classic patented parenting move. Ignore the fire and maybe it will magically burn itself out. Only it never did. It just burned whoever happened to be standing closest. And usually my entire life that collateral damage was me. Cedric squeezed my hand, his grip tight and grounding. His voice was low and perfectly steady when he leaned down to my ear and murmured, "Do you want me to ask security to escort her out?" "I can do it right now, Isolde. Just say the word and she is gone." It was so tempting. God, it was so unbelievably tempting to just nod and watch her get dragged out. But I looked around at the faces of our guests. I looked at Cedric's parents who were decent, kind, normal people who had never experienced this kind of toxic, dramatic family dynamic in their entire lives. If I kicked her out, she would scream. She would cry hysterically. She would make a massive, unforgettable scene, and then for the rest of my life, my wedding day would be remembered as the day I ruthlessly threw my own sister out. She would become the tragic victim just like she always managed to do. She didn't care about ruining things. She never does. She just wants to dictate the narrative. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I took a deep, shaky breath, pasted a bright smile on my face, and shook my head. "No," I told Cedric softly. "Let it go. We are absolutely not letting her hijack our night." So, we pretended. We both put on our invisible armor and pretended that everything was completely fine and normal. Cedric didn't deserve to have his expensive, carefully planned wedding night hijacked by my sister's desperate need for attention, and I was going to do everything in my physical and mental power to protect him from it. I kept glancing up at him throughout the first hour, half expecting him to get visibly upset or snap, but he didn't. He just kept smiling warmly at our guests, kept a firm, protective hand resting on the small of my back, and kept the beautiful vibe alive like the absolute king he is. But honestly, watching him do that almost made it worse for me. Knowing exactly how much effort my new husband was putting in to politely pretend my sister wasn't a glaring white stain on the room just highlighted how completely insane my family's dynamic was. So I matched his energy. I forced myself to laugh loudly when the best man told a joke I barely heard. I danced when the band played our favorite upbeat songs, twirling around the floor even though my chest felt tight. I thanked guests for coming, making sure to look them in the eye, and clinked my champagne flute when people topped theirs. I posed for dozens of group photos I suddenly didn't want to be in anymore, smiling so aggressively that my cheeks physically ached. All of it felt like walking barefoot on a floor covered in broken glass. Every single step, every smile, every polite conversation required this immense, exhausting, soul-crushing emotional effort. What was supposed to be the happiest, most carefree night of our lives had instantly turned into this quiet, grueling endurance test. Because Lavinia made sure we had to work for every second of peace. She didn't just sit quietly in the corner in her inappropriate white dress. She floated around the room all night, loudly talking over my friends, inserting herself into the middle of group photos uninvited and acting like she was the co-host of the event. And everyone knew it. The whole room felt the thick, uncomfortable tension radiating from her table. We got through the beautifully plated steak dinner, though I barely tasted a single bite of mine. We got through the father-daughter dances where my dad awkwardly avoided eye contact with me the entire time. We got through the heartfelt speeches. Throughout the night, multiple people kept pulling me aside into quiet corners, asking in hushed, concerned tones if I was okay or if they should say something to her. Some of them were noticing the blatant disrespect. Some were just guessing something was very wrong based on the rigid set of my shoulders. I shrugged them all off with a breezy fake laugh. "I am fine," I kept saying over and over again. "Everything is wonderful." I wasn't about to let Lavinia win by turning my dream night into a messy, dramatic spectacle. The whole feeling reminded me so much of my college graduation. I had worked 2 jobs to graduate with honors, and on the day of the ceremony, Lavinia faked a massive panic attack in the parking lot because her boyfriend hadn't texted her back. We entirely missed my name being called. My parents spent the whole afternoon comforting her while I stood in my cap and gown holding my own diploma. I swallowed my pride then, just like I was swallowing it now. I kept telling myself, staring at the clock on the wall, that we only had a couple of hours left. Just 2 more hours, the reception would end. Cedric and I would leave for our luxury hotel, and I wouldn't have to look at her smug face in that damn white dress ever again. We could just put our heads down and get through this. But she didn't need 2 hours. She only needed 10 seconds. It happened near the very end of the reception, right when I thought we were finally safe. Most of the formal events were over. The 4-tier cake had been cut and served, and things had finally started to feel genuinely relaxed and normal again. The overhead lights were dimmed low, and the DJ was playing a slow, smooth rhythm and blues track. Everyone was laughing, leaning back in their chairs, the air thick with the smell of spun sugar and expensive liquor. A few guests were still making small spontaneous toasts at their individual tables, raising their half-empty glasses to Cedric and me. The tension in my shoulders had finally started to uncoil. That was exactly when Lavinia stood up from her seat at the family table. She was holding a large, heavy crystal goblet filled completely to the brim with dark red wine. She picked up a silver fork and tapped it aggressively against the side of the glass. Ding, ding, ding. The sharp, metallic sound cut harshly through the low hum of conversation. The DJ, noticing the noise, respectfully faded the music down to a whisper. Heads turned toward her from all corners of the room. For one brief, incredibly naive second, I actually thought maybe she was going to try and smooth things over. Maybe she had realized how ridiculous and selfish she looked all night, and wanted to pretend to be gracious just to save face in front of Cedric's family. Maybe she was going to offer a standard polite toast to the bride and groom, wishing us well so she could look like the bigger person. Instead, she turned her body completely away from Cedric. She looked dead at me. Her eyes were cold, hard, and totally sober. She wasn't drunk. This was entirely calculated. She raised the heavy glass of red wine, a cruel, mocking smirk playing on the corner of her lips, and her voice echoed clearly across the dead silent room. "Here's to the fake saint in white," she said loudly. Before those venomous words could even fully register in my exhausted brain, before anyone could gasp, stand up, or react, she threw it. She didn't stumble. She didn't trip over the hem of her dress. She stepped forward, swung her arm in a wide, powerful, deliberate arc, and hurled the entire contents of the goblet straight at my chest. It hit me full on with a heavy, wet slap. The dark, thick, crimson liquid splashed violently across the bodice of my custom silk gown. It soaked instantly through the delicate hand-stitched white lace, spreading rapidly like a massive, jagged wound across my ribs, and dripping heavily down the front of the pristine silk skirt. I gasped sharply at the sudden freezing cold wetness shocking my warm skin. The pungent, fermented smell of grapes and alcohol completely overpowered the scent of roses. It all happened so incredibly fast, so perfectly and deliberately calculated that the dozens of people standing around us didn't even process what their eyes had just seen right away. My uncle, standing near the open bar, actually let out a short, confused chuckle, genuinely thinking it was some sort of pre-planned comedy bit or a magic trick gone wrong. Then the brutal reality set in. The laugh died instantly in his throat. Complete, suffocating, horrifying silence dropped over the room like a lead weight. A few people jumped out of their chairs scraping loudly against the wood. One of Cedric's cousins dropped her champagne flute in pure shock, the delicate glass shattering loudly against the floorboards. Cedric immediately stepped in front of me, his broad chest shielding mine from the crowd, his face entirely unreadable, but his hands balled into such tight fists at his sides that his knuckles were pure white. I looked down past his arm at my dress. The beautiful, pristine white silk was totally ruined. Dark red stains were blooming aggressively across the fabric, heavy and wet, and impossible to wash out. The dress I had saved for over 2 years to buy, the dress I had felt so uniquely beautiful in, was completely destroyed in a matter of 10 seconds. And Lavinia just stood there, the empty crystal glass dangling loosely from her fingers, looking utterly, sickeningly satisfied with herself. And then my mother finally moved. After standing paralyzed all evening while her youngest daughter made a mockery of my wedding, God help me, my mother sprang into action, but she didn't run to me. She didn't rush over to see if I was okay or grab a napkin to help dab the wine off my ruined gown or ask Cedric to help me. No. Felicity rushed frantically toward Lavinia. She grabbed her 4-year-old daughter by the arm, her eyes wide with frantic, protective panic. Not for the bride standing soaked in alcohol, but for the girl who had just maliciously thrown it. She didn't mean it. My mother blurted out loudly, her voice high-pitched, trembling and echoing in the dead, quiet room as she looked around at the horrified, disgusted faces of my guests. It slipped. The glass was slippery. It was an accident. She didn't mean it. Of course she meant it. Everyone in that room with functioning eyes knew she meant it. Lavinia never lets her anger or jealousy sit quietly. If she feels insecure or bored, or just wants to remind everyone in her radius that she holds the absolute power to ruin things, she burns the whole room down just to feel like she is the only one left standing victorious on the ashes. And my mother's instinct, deeply ingrained instinct, was to throw her own body over Lavinia to protect her from the heat of the fire she had just started. That exact moment right there, standing shivering in a ruined dress while watching my mother desperately shield my abuser from consequence, broke something very deep inside of me. It wasn't a loud, dramatic, shattering break. It was a quiet, clean, irreversible snap of a bone. I didn't say a single word. I didn't scream at Lavinia. I didn't yell at my mother for being a coward. I didn't even cry. I just turned on my heel, the heavy, wet, wine-soaked silk of my ruined dream dress dragging pitifully against the floor, and walked away. I walked straight out of the reception hall, down the long, dimly lit corridor, and into the private bridal suite. Cedric followed quietly right behind me, shutting and locking the heavy wooden door once we were safely inside. In the absolute quiet of that room, surrounded by my discarded makeup brushes and extra hairpins, I slowly peeled off the sticky, ruined gown. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. My skin was actually stained, a faint pink, where the cheap red wine had soaked all the way through the lining. I didn't feel hysterical. I didn't feel like sobbing. Instead, I felt incredibly cold and incredibly dangerously clear-headed. I washed my chest and arms with a warm washcloth in the sink, watching the pink water spiral down the drain. Then I changed into the backup dress I had packed, a simple, understated navy blue cocktail dress I had brought just in case I got too hot dancing late into the night. It wasn't meant for this. It was never meant to be a replacement for a destroyed wedding gown. I fixed my makeup, smoothing out my expression, and looked over at Cedric. He was sitting on the edge of the sofa, watching me with this intense, heartbreaking sorrow in his dark eyes. He hated seeing me treated like this more than anything. I walked over, took his hand, gave it a firm, reassuring squeeze, and we walked right back out there. I came back out into that reception hall, smiling again, pretending again, because Cedric deserved to remember the end of his wedding night with his wife holding her head high. No matter how badly my toxic sister tried to poison the memory, but inside my head, as I danced the very last dance of the night in a plain navy dress, while my ruined wedding gown lay in a wet heap in the other room, a massive switch flipped in my brain. I made a silent, unshakable vow to myself. That was the last time Lavinia would ever humiliate me. The era of me being the family sponge, quietly absorbing all the damage to keep everyone else comfortable, was officially permanently over. Hours later, after the final guests had awkwardly shuffled out, after the venue was finally cleared of the hushed whispers and the agonizingly pitying stares, Cedric and I went back to our flat. We were exhausted in a deeply profound way that had absolutely nothing to do with being awake for 20 hours. Cedric took his suit jacket off, kissed my forehead gently, told me he loved me more than anything in the world, and fell asleep almost as soon as his head hit the pillow. His emotional battery was completely, totally drained, but I stayed awake. I couldn't have slept if someone paid me. I walked out into the living room and sat at our kitchen island in the dark, the only light coming from the amber street lamps outside our window and the harsh, bright blue glow of my laptop screen. The flat was dead, comfortably silent. I opened my internet browser and deliberately typed in the address for my banking portal. I logged in, bypassed the security questions, and clicked directly over to the shared current account. The one Lavinia had full debit card access to, the exact same account I had exclusively funded with my own paycheck for the past 3.5 years. I sat there in the dark and just looked at the recent transaction history: groceries from an expensive organic market, petrol for her car, a £250 charge at a trendy downtown hair salon, a £40 charge for premium iced coffees over the span of 3 days. All of it paid for by me. This was the magic account that kept her life from completely falling apart while she continuously, relentlessly played at being a helpless, misunderstood victim. When she blew all her savings last year on a stupid essential oil pyramid scheme her friend dragged her into, I was the one who quietly bailed her out so she wouldn't get evicted. When she missed the financial aid grant deadline for her university because she was too busy partying and finding herself, I was the one who covered her massive tuition bill so she wouldn't get kicked out of her program. When she crashed her car and didn't have the right insurance coverage, I helped her pay for the daily rental. I was her personal unlimited bank, her invisible safety net, her full-time crisis manager. And she never, not once, said a simple thank you. She just acted like it was a fundamental, unwritten law of the universe that her successful big sister owed her a comfortable, consequence-free life. I stared at the glowing screen, my eyes burning slightly from exhaustion and staring at the blue light. I thought about the heavy splash of red wine hitting my chest. I thought about the cruel, victorious smirk on her face as she watched it drip. I thought about my mother aggressively grabbing her arm, begging the horrified room to forgive her baby girl. I realized in that quiet moment that my family's entire toxic ecosystem relied entirely on me absorbing the heavy impact of Lavinia's actions so that they never had to deal with the actual consequences. If I paid the bills, my parents didn't have to parent her. Not anymore. I navigated over to the account management settings. I scrolled down until I found the advanced security tab. It didn't feel like revenge. My heart wasn't racing. I didn't feel hot or angry or malicious. It felt incredibly clinical, like a necessary overdue correction, like I was finally balancing a financial spreadsheet that had been mathematically incorrect for a decade. I moved my cursor over the red button that said freeze account. I didn't pick up my phone to send her a warning text. I didn't call my parents to discuss it or ask for permission. I just pressed down firmly on the laptop trackpad. Click! The screen refreshed with a little spinning wheel. Then the bold text appeared. Account locked. Status frozen. I slowly closed the laptop, walked quietly back into the bedroom, curled my body up next to the warm weight of my sleeping husband, and for the first time in over 10 years, I slept deeply, completely like a baby. The next morning, the bright Sunday was shining directly through our bedroom blinds, casting long, warm shadows across the floor. I woke up feeling bizarrely, incredibly rested. My chest felt lighter than it had in months. I slipped out from under the covers, careful not to wake Cedric, who was still breathing heavily, and padded barefoot into the kitchen to brew some coffee. The rich, earthy smell of dark roast beans filled the flat, grounding me, reminding me that I was standing in my own home, completely safe from the madness of my childhood house. At exactly 8:40 inches the morning, an automated financial system at the State University fired off a massive batch of scheduled emails. One of those emails landed directly in Lavinia's inbox. I knew exactly how this system worked because I used to get copied on all her administrative and billing alerts back when I spent 3 hours setting up her student profile for her. The email she received was short, bureaucratic, and brutally final. It explicitly stated that her final payment for the semester's tuition balance had bounced due to a frozen payment method. As a result of the severely past due balance, her enrollment for the current term was immediately and permanently withdrawn. At exactly 8:41 inches the morning, my mobile phone rang. It was sitting face up on the kitchen granite counter, buzzing aggressively and spinning slightly from the vibration. The caller ID flashed my mother's name in bright white letters. I didn't rush to answer it. I didn't feel a sudden spike of anxiety in my chest. I just calmly poured my hot coffee into my favorite ceramic mug, stirred in a generous splash of oat milk, and watched the phone screen light up, vibrate violently across the stone, and finally go dark. 10 seconds later, it rang again and then again. I absolutely did not want to bring this hysterical chaos into my first full, peaceful day as a married woman. I knew exactly word for word how that phone call would go. The second I swiped the green button, the exhausting cycle would start. The breathless, rapid-fire questions, the heavy manipulative guilt-tripping, the fake maternal concern layered thinly over raw, unfiltered panic. Felicity would start by crying loudly about how devastated and confused Lavinia was, and then she would seamlessly pivot to telling me how I had massively overreacted and needed to log in and fix it right this very second. That is exactly how the script was written for us. So I let it go straight to voicemail. By the time the 5th missed call notification popped up, my phone buzzed with a different sound. A text message. I casually tapped the screen to read it, taking a slow sip of my coffee. It was from my mother. It wasn't a paragraph. It was just one single demanding sentence. What did you do to your sister? Not, good morning, honey. How are you feeling today? Not, I am so incredibly sorry about your dress last night. Not, how is Cedric doing? Just an immediate panicked accusation, automatically assuming that I had actively, maliciously done something cruel to her precious, innocent youngest daughter. It was so incredibly painfully predictable that I actually let out a short, dry laugh in the empty kitchen. I set my coffee mug down on a coaster. I picked up the phone and typed out my response, making absolutely sure I hit the period at the end for maximum finality. Nothing. And as I hit send, I realized it was the absolute truth because I really hadn't done anything to her. For the first time in her 24 years of privileged life, I was literally doing nothing. I wasn't paying her debts. I wasn't fixing her mistakes. I wasn't absorbing her shock. I had simply stepped out of the way. And without me constantly holding her up, gravity was finally taking over. Let her fall, I thought, as I tossed the phone onto the couch cushion and walked back to my warm coffee. Let her finally see what the hard ground actually feels like. By noon that exact same day, my mobile phone rang once again. This time, however, the caller ID did not flash my mother's name in bright letters. It was my father, Reginald. My father and I have a distinctly different relationship than the exhausting dynamic I share with my mother. He was never the highly dramatic screaming type. He did not cry. He did not throw aggressive tantrums. And he did not send cryptic, passive-aggressive text messages to get his way. He was a strict pragmatist, a quiet, heavily burdened man who just wanted the house to be absolutely silent when he came home from his corporate job. His entire parenting strategy for my entire life consisted of taking the path of least resistance. And for the last 15 years, taking the path of least resistance meant forcing me to give Lavinia whatever she wanted just so she would stop yelling and let him watch his evening news in peace. I let the phone ring 3 times, took a very long, deep breath to steady my heart rate, and finally answered. I did not say hello. I just pressed the cool glass of the phone to my ear and waited for him to speak first. Isolde, he said heavily. His voice was thick, tired, and completely devoid of any warmth or congratulatory tone regarding my wedding the night before. He did not ask how Cedric was doing. He did not ask how I was feeling after being violently assaulted with red alcohol in front of 100 of my closest friends and colleagues. He just got straight to the business of maintaining his own fragile, selfish peace. Your mother is in absolute hysterics right now. Lavinia is packing her bags because the school housing authority just told her she has to officially vacate her student apartment by the end of the week. Do you have any idea how serious this situation is? I leaned comfortably against the kitchen counter, casually tracing the grout lines of the tile with my index finger. I am very comprehensively aware of how university billing cycles work. Dad, I am the one who spent 3 hours setting up her financial account in the first place. He sighed loudly into the receiver. It was the exact same heavy, deeply disappointed sigh he used to give me when I was a teenager, refusing to let Lavinia borrow my expensive clothes for a party. She has absolutely no way to fix this right now, he continued, his tone shifting into that calm, authoritative register he always used to guilt me into submission. The university administration is not going to make a special exception just because her older sister is being petty and holding a personal grudge. If you do not call the bank and authorize the payment release by tomorrow morning, she might lose the entire academic semester. She might lose the whole year, Isolde. You are ruining her timeline. I stood there and listened to him lay out the catastrophic, life-altering consequences of Lavinia's actions, fully expecting me to step in and play the heroic savior like I always did. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch out over the cellular line for a few long, heavy seconds. Good, I said evenly. There was a dead, echoing silence on the other end of the phone. I could clearly hear the faint sound of suburban traffic passing by wherever he was standing. Then he cleared his throat uncomfortably. You do not mean that. You are angry, and you certainly have a right to be upset about the dress incident. But you do not mean that you actually want your own sister to fail. You clearly do not know me very well anymore, I told him, my voice dropping an octave, completely losing any trace of the polite, accommodating daughter he was so used to dealing with. That was the exact moment the family dynamic permanently, irreversibly shifted, because for years they had seen me as the ultimate unbreakable shock absorber, the one who never lost control, who always paid the bills on time, who always forgave the unforgivable, who always swallowed the bitter insult to keep the holiday dinners peaceful. They had built their entire comfortable, conflict-free lives on that foundation on me. And now, suddenly, I was the massive problem, because I had simply decided to stop being their foundation. I didn't yell at him. I didn't try to frantically explain my pain because I knew in my soul he didn't actually care about my pain. He only cared about his own daily inconvenience. I quietly pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, hanging up on my father for the very first time in my entire life. Hanging up the phone on my father felt like stepping through a heavy doorway into a completely different, strangely bright reality. I genuinely expected to feel a crushing wave of guilt, but I didn't feel guilty at all. If anything, that brief, frustrating conversation only solidified my cold resolve. They did not know the half of it because freezing that current account was just the opening move in a very long game. Later that afternoon, while Cedric was out running some quick errands and picking up lunch for us from a local deli, I sat right back down at my kitchen island and opened my laptop. I pulled up my password manager and navigated directly to my corporate health insurance portal. A little over 2 years ago, Lavinia had abruptly quit her retail job because she claimed the shift manager looked at her funny and disrespected her creative energy. She immediately lost her minimal medical benefits, and my mother had called me weeping hysterically about how Lavinia had a slight seasonal cough and could not afford to see a doctor without going into massive debt. I was in a generous mood back then, and I had a fantastic top-tier policy through my financial firm, so I went through the tedious bureaucratic paperwork to legally add her as a domestic dependent. It was only supposed to be a temporary safety net, just until she got back on her feet and found a new job. That was exactly 26 months ago. She never paid me a single pence for her portion of the insurance premium, which ran me about £450 out of my paycheck every single month. I logged into the secure portal, clicked on the Active Dependent tab, and selected her full name. A little red warning box popped up on the screen asking if I was absolutely sure I wanted to permanently terminate coverage for this individual due to a qualifying life event. I clicked yes. The system processed with a spinning wheel for a few seconds, and then her name simply vanished from the screen forever. Quietly, without any fanfare or dramatic confrontation, I shut that expensive door. Next, I opened a new browser tab and went straight to the Federal Student Loan Servicing website. The massive educational loans were unfortunately tied directly to my name as a co-signer because her personal credit was completely destroyed from years of unpaid credit cards. A year ago, she complained endlessly that she could not afford the minimum monthly payments and still have enough leftover money to go out to nice dinners with her friends on the weekends. So, like an absolute idiot, I linked my own primary current account and set up an automatic recurring payment for £275 on the first of every single month. I navigated to the billing section, found the active recurring payment rule, and hit delete. Those loans would go into default within 30 days unless she manually logged in and attached her own bank routing number. I did not send her an email to warn her. I did not text my parents to announce what I was doing to their golden child. I certainly did not post any passive-aggressive quotes about it online. I didn't make a massive scene or try to publicly embarrass her the way she had intentionally, viciously embarrassed me in front of my husband's entire extended family. I just sat at my dining table drinking ice water and let the solid ground beneath her feet quietly fall away into the abyss. Because here was the ugly, highly uncomfortable truth that no one in my family ever wanted to admit out loud. Lavinia's entire stability came directly from me. Every single good thing she had in her life, her safe apartment, her running car, her university education, her physical health, was either inherited from someone else's unearned grace or bailed out by my wallet when she inevitably messed it up. She liked to pretend she was this fiercely independent, strong woman fighting against a harsh world. But she was just a parasite feeding on a willing host. And when she decided to humiliate me, intentionally trying to ruin the one single moment in my life that was supposed to be sacred and entirely mine, that was her cashing out the absolute last of her available credit. When Cedric came back to the flat carrying turkey sandwiches, he saw my phone buzzing on the counter and asked if I wanted to talk about it. I took a bite of my lunch, looked him right in the eye, and told him that everything was already handled. The next 2 full days were completely entirely quiet, almost too quiet, like the heavy air before a massive thunderstorm. There were no more screaming phone calls from my mother, There were no more blunt, heavily disappointed voicemails from my father. There was just this deep, suffocating silence radiating from their end. Honestly, the silence was almost worse than the screaming because I knew exactly what it meant. They were regrouping. They were sitting in their living room, frantically trying to figure out how to spin this narrative, how to manipulate the situation, and how to forcefully push me back into my designated line. I had completely gone off their carefully written script, and that terrified them more than anything Lavinia had ever done in her entire life. But of course, the silence did not last. By day 3, the relentless campaign began. It started relatively small and somewhat subtle. My mother texted me a scanned, blurry photo of Lavinia's original college acceptance letter from 4 years ago, as if that dusty piece of paper somehow made a logical case for why I should fix everything she had just broken. Then came a very long, rambling message from my mother about how everyone makes terrible mistakes when they are young, and how intense stress affects people in different ways, and how weddings can be highly emotional events for the unmarried younger sibling. There was absolutely no mention of the red wine. There was no mention of the ruined silk dress. There was absolutely no apology. Just passive, vague phrases orbiting around what had actually happened, treating her malicious physical attack like it was just a random weather event that nobody could control. I actively ignored all of it. Then she severely escalated the tactics. The flying monkeys arrived in full force. I started getting text messages from the extended cousin brigade. People I had not spoken to in over 3 years suddenly felt the intense burning need to reach out to me. I got a long-winded message from my auntie and full of fake, sugary warmth. She wrote, "Hey, sweetie, haven't talked in a while, but your mom told me there is some family friction. Just wanted to say family is forever and we need to stick together." Another cousin named Mark wrote, "You know how she is. You are the stable one. We are all counting on you to pull this back together and be the bigger person." There it was. You are the stable one. That one single line pissed me off infinitely more than the red wine ever did. Because yes, I have always been the stable one. I am the one who shows up early, who pays on time, who fixes what breaks, who swallows every bitter insult for the sake of keeping holiday dinners peaceful. And they fully, completely expected me to do it again right on schedule like clockwork. But I was not doing it this time. Not after what she did to me. And definitely not after what she tried to do to Cedric's memory of our wedding. And just when I thought I could not be any more disgusted by my family, Lavinia confidently played her hand. She did not call to apologize. She did not ask for forgiveness. She posted a photo on her public Instagram page. It wasn't one of those vague, dramatic black and white quotes people use when they are spiraling. This was a crisp, full-color, beautifully lit photo of herself sitting at a trendy downtown bar, smiling widely and holding up a large crystal glass of red wine. The caption underneath it read, "Some people are incredibly great at pretending. Guess I learned from the absolute best." And she maliciously tagged me. She tagged my official profile directly in the photo so all of my professional contacts and friends could see it. That was the exact moment I realized she did not just think she could talk her way out of this with fake tears and parental pressure. She genuinely thought she could publicly control the narrative. She wanted to twist the story to her hundreds of followers, painting me as the petty, heartless, cold older sister who abandoned her for absolutely no reason. She wanted a very public, very messy war, completely unaware that I had already stripped away all her armor. When I saw that Instagram notification pop up on my phone screen, I felt a strange calm wash entirely over my body. I did not furiously type out a defensive comment on her post. I did not screenshot it and post a long, rambling counter-argument on my own page to prove my innocence to strangers. Getting down into the digital mud to wrestle with a pig only gets you dirty, and the pig actively enjoys it. Instead, I did something much, much worse. I went completely nuclear. For the past 12 months, Lavinia had been bragging nonstop to our extended family about this highly prestigious local business grant she was supposedly in the running for. It was a well-funded scholarship foundation specifically designed for young female entrepreneurs. What she conveniently left out of her relentless bragging was that she had applied at the absolute last minute, only after I practically held her hand through the entire grueling application process. And more importantly, what she never publicly acknowledged was that my professional letter of support was the only reason her application made it past the very first round of cuts. Because of my respected position as a financial director in the city, I had direct personal ties to the foundation board members. I had written a glowing 2-page endorsement vouching for her stability, her maturity, and her excellent moral character. I opened my email client, searched for the direct contact address of the foundation director, and hit compose. I did not have to lie. I did not have to exaggerate a single thing to ruin her. I simply wrote a brief, highly professional note stating that due to recent severe behavioral issues, I needed to formally withdraw my professional endorsement of the candidate. I attached a forwarded copy of the university's official withdrawal notice, proving her complete lack of academic standing, and politely let them know that I could no longer in good conscience support her participation in their esteemed program. I hit send, closed the laptop, and went into the kitchen to make dinner. They must have processed my urgent email incredibly fast because by 2:00 the very next afternoon, she was officially dropped from the scholarship program. She found out almost instantly, and for the very first time in an entire week, my phone rang with her specific custom ring. She called me 3 times, back to back to back. On the third ring, I calmly swiped the screen to answer. I did not say hello, you absolute psycho. She screamed into the receiver. She did not even try to mask the raw, vibrating panic in her voice. The smug Instagram-ready persona was completely, totally gone. You ruined my future. I needed that money to survive. You are just jealous of my potential because you are a boring corporate drone, and now everything is falling apart because you are being a vindictive, hateful. I did not say anything. I just stood in the center of my living room looking out the large window at the city skyline and let the heavy, dead silence hang on the line while she breathed heavily into the microphone. When she finally realized I was not going to take the bait and screamed back at her, her tone rapidly shifted. The burning panic morphed into a desperate, frantic attempt at negotiation. What is it going to take? She demanded, her voice actually cracking slightly. Do you want money? I can pay you back for the stupid dress eventually. Do you want a public apology? I can take the post down right now and let you post something for clarity. Just email the board and tell them it was a huge misunderstanding. She was actually trying to negotiate with me like this was a standard business transaction. Like she had any leverage left at all. There is absolutely nothing you can offer me, Lavinia, I said quietly. My voice was so calm and detached. It barely sounded like my own. You are not serious, she stammered, the brutal reality finally starting to bleed into her stubborn brain. Isolde, stop doing this. This is your sister. Yeah, I replied softly. That used to mean something to me. And then, without waiting for another word, I ended the call. By Friday evening, the harsh reality of her situation had completely, undeniably crystallized. Without the frozen current account to pull emergency cash from, and without her active student status to legally keep her in the building, she was officially formally evicted from the university dormitories. I did not ask my parents where she ended up. I did not reach out to check on her logistics or offer a moving van. I simply went about my life enjoying my first weekend as a married woman, letting the heavy chips fall wherever they may. But my mother, entirely incapable of letting me live in peace for more than a few days, tried to launch one final desperate guilt trip that Saturday afternoon. My phone buzzed with an incoming high-resolution image file. I opened the text message. It was a photograph of Lavinia sitting heavily on an ugly, stained beige couch in what looked like the cramped, dingy living room of some friend's cheap flat. Surrounding her feet were 4 massive, heavy-duty black plastic bin bags, stuffed to the absolute brim with her clothes and belongings. She was looking down at her phone, her hair messy, looking genuinely, profoundly defeated. My mother had attached a dramatic caption that read, "Look what you have done to your own blood." I stared at the photograph on my screen for a very long time. I think my mother truly expected me to break down right then and there. She expected that seeing my little sister practically homeless, surrounded by literal bin bags, would finally trigger that deeply ingrained big sister protective instinct she had aggressively trained into me for 30 years. She expected me to call back, crying, apologizing, asking for a routing number to send thousands of pounds in cash. Instead, my eyes drifted completely past Lavinia's slumped shoulders and focused on the background of the image. Peeking out from behind one of the shiny black plastic bags was a large brown cardboard moving box. Written across the side of the box in thick black permanent marker were the words Lavinia's winter clothes. Handle with care. It was my distinct handwriting. I zoomed in on the image, staring hard at the loops of the letters. A vivid, exhausting memory slammed into my chest. Exactly 1 year ago, Lavinia had been too incredibly hungover to pack her own room for the move into the dorms. I had spent 6 agonizing hours on a Sunday on my only day off from the firm, carefully folding her heavy sweaters, wrapping her fragile items in tissue paper and meticulously labeling every single box so she wouldn't be stressed out when she unpacked. I had bought the expensive packing tape. I had rented the moving van. I had driven her there, unpacked the boxes myself, and bought her a 200-pound grocery haul so her fridge would be full. I sat there on my pristine couch staring at the photo and realized just how much of my precious, irreplaceable life had gone into holding hers together. Thousands of hours, tens of thousands of pounds, an entirely unquantifiable amount of emotional labor. And my grand reward for all of that sacrifice was having cheap red wine hurled at my chest on my wedding day while my own mother defended the thrower. The very last microscopic drop of pity I held in my heart for that girl instantly evaporated into thin air. It did not turn to anger, it just turned to nothing. An absolute echoing hollow void. I deleted the photograph from my phone. I did not reply to my mother's message. I did not block her number because I wanted her to shout into the void and realize that nobody was ever going to answer her cries again. By the end of that week, it became glaringly obvious that it was not just Lavinia's life unraveling anymore. It was the entire foundation of my family. The group texts from relatives slowly died out when they realized I was absolutely not going to respond to their manipulative pleas. The ecosystem had finally collapsed. Lavinia was the designated unstable one, the one everyone worried about, catered to, and instantly forgave. I was the designated responsible one, the unshakable safety net. And I had simply taken a sharp pair of scissors and cut the net. So the whole structure came crashing down, and I was perfectly fine watching the dust settle from a very safe distance. That Sunday evening, Cedric and I had a scheduled dinner with his parents, Richard and Martha. Walking into their warm, inviting suburban home felt like stepping onto an entirely different planet. There was absolutely no screaming. There was no underlying tension thick enough to cut with a steak knife. There was just the comforting smell of roasted chicken, the quiet clinking of silverware, and genuine pleasant conversation about work, travel, and our upcoming honeymoon to Europe. We sat around their beautiful mahogany dining table, and eventually the topic drifted naturally to the wedding. We did not hide anything from them to save face. We told them the absolute truth about what had happened, entirely devoid of any dramatic flair, just laying out the cold, hard facts of the week. Martha reached across the table and placed her warm hand gently over mine, her eyes full of quiet, fierce empathy. Richard, who was normally a very quiet, observant man, leaned back in his chair, wiped his mouth carefully with a linen napkin, and looked directly at me. "Well," Richard said softly, a small, slightly sad smile on his face. "It sounds to me like you are finally done playing the role they wrote for you." I nodded, feeling a heavy lump form in my throat. That was exactly what it was, a role. A poorly written, drastically underpaid role in a tragic play I never actually auditioned for. Hearing someone else validate my reality without making me feel like a monster was incredibly healing. When we got back to our apartment complex later that night, I noticed a white piece of paper sticking out from underneath our front door. I pulled it out and unfolded it right there in the hallway. It was a handwritten letter from Lavinia, but it was not an apology. It was not a tearful confession of guilt or a plea for a sisterly relationship. It was literally an itemized list. She had written down a meticulous, detailed column of things she desperately needed to get back on track. There was a line for the exact tuition balance. There was a line for an apartment deposit estimate. There was even a bullet point asking for 6 months of living expenses until she could figure out how to transfer her failed academic credits to a local community college. At the very bottom of the page, written in hurried, messy blue ink, she had scrolled, "I know you do not owe me this, but I am asking anyway." That one single line stuck with me. Not because it was sincere, but because it meant that for the very first time in her completely sheltered life, she actually knew the truth. She knew the well was entirely dry. She knew I did not owe her my blood, sweat, and money anymore. I did not take the list inside the flat to show Cedric. I walked down the hall and dropped it directly into the bin, listening to it flutter down into the darkness. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the very first ring, breathless, probably desperately hoping I was calling to surrender and ask for Lavinia's new bank details. "Mum," I said, my voice incredibly steady, flat, and cold. "Listen to me very carefully. Lavinia slid a list of demands under my door tonight. I threw the list away. I am not helping her. Not this time. Not next time. Not ever again. Do not contact me about her finances ever again, or I will block your number permanently." And before she could even formulate a single tearful word or launch into a guilt trip, I hung up. 3 entire weeks went by. The quiet was almost deeply unsettling at first, like the eerie dead stillness after a violent hurricane passes over your house. There were no phone calls. There were no manipulative text messages. There were no updates from my parents. Even Lavinia's normally hyperactive social media accounts went completely dark. Radio silence, like she had just dropped off the face of the map. Part of me genuinely thought maybe she had left the country, run back to some old college friend group, or couch-hopped until she could land somewhere soft again. But that was not what happened. On a random Thursday morning, while I was sitting at my kitchen island drinking hot tea and reviewing some complex spreadsheets for work, there was a quiet, hesitant knock on my front door. Cedric was already at his firm. So, I walked over and looked through the glass peephole. It was not Lavinia. It was her ex-boyfriend, Derek. I unlocked the heavy door and opened it slowly. I barely recognized him. He looked terrible, significantly worse than I remembered from family dinners a year ago. He was painfully thin, exhausted, with dark purple circles under his eyes, looking like life had been chewing on him for a very long time and was finally starting to swallow. "I do not want any drama, Isolde," he said immediately, holding his hands up in a placating, defensive gesture. "I swear to you, I just needed to tell you something." I stepped back and silently let him into the entryway. He stood awkwardly on the rug and told me he had run into Lavinia 2 nights earlier by pure accident. She was not staying with glamorous friends. She was living in a cheap pay-by-the-week motel on the edge of the city limits. That detail alone should have been shocking enough. A massive catastrophic fall from grace for the spoiled girl in the custom white dress. But what came out of his mouth next made my stomach twist into a tight knot. "She told me she is pregnant," Derek said quietly, staring intently at the floorboards. I did not say anything at first. I just stood there staring at him, processing the heavy words. Because what on earth are you supposed to say to something like that? I did not even believe it initially. Not because I thought she was above lying about something so incredibly serious, but because I did not think she would use that specific card unless she was absolutely, completely desperate. Derek shook his head, anticipating my silent doubt. She did not ask me for anything. Not a single pound, not a ride, not for help. She just said she desperately needed to tell someone. He looked up at me then, his eyes incredibly sad and deeply tired. She told me, "You are still the only person in this world who has ever really taken care of her." And she told me she knows she permanently ruined it. Then Derek reached into his worn jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a folded-up printout from a free community health clinic. There was no fancy official hospital letterhead. It was just a standard cheap medical form, the kind that gets handed to you in a cramped, poorly lit waiting room. He handed it to me, pregnancy confirmed. Gestational age 6 weeks. I stood in my beautiful, peaceful flat holding the cheap paper. Derek did not ask me for instructions or beg me to help her. He just nodded, said he thought I had a right to know the absolute truth, and quietly let himself out the front door, disappearing down the hallway. I walked back into the kitchen, sat down at the wooden table, and unfolded the paper. I just stared at the black ink. And in that specific moment, I did not feel what I expected to feel. I did not feel a sudden rush of white-hot anger. I did not feel a crushing wave of sisterly guilt or obligation. I felt relief. Absolute, pure, unadulterated relief because now I knew for a strict fact that this was not just about unpaid tuition bills or red wine on a wedding dress anymore. This was Lavinia's entire life completely unraveling, spiraling out of control in a massive way that a few thousand could not instantly fix. And for the very first time in my entire life, this massive, life-altering problem was absolutely not my job to solve. It was not my responsibility to cushion her fall. I folded the paper in half, walked over to the junk drawer in the kitchen, dropped it inside, and firmly pushed the drawer shut. I turned around, poured myself another cup of hot tea, and went back to my work, leaving her entirely in the Kamse.